Hey friends! So this is the second part of the Victorian stitch pattern series, and this time I shall show you how to knit these pretty leaves. If you haven't seen the first video of this series, by the way, it featured the waffle stitch pattern, which you can find on my channel should you be interested in knitting that. When I have knitted a sufficient amount of these squares, I'm planning on making a throw out of them, or an afghan as it's most commonly called in Victorian books, or knitted quilt as Mrs. Lynn says. The leaf pattern is from an 1892 book, The Art of Knitting by the Buderick Publishing Company. This square is also 8 inches by 8 inches or 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters in size, the same as the previous waffle stitch one obviously. To achieve this size I had to make some modifications to the leaf pattern, which I shall try to note as we go along. So the book says to cast on a multiple of 10 stitches plus 9. This gives you 9 edge stitches on each side of the piece. That, however, did not work for the size I was going for, because I wanted at least 3 leaves in a row for my square, but 39 stitches would have been too much, so I cast on 31 stitches instead, and this way I have 5 edge stitches on each side. So after deciding on the number of stitches you want, you cast on, then knit one row plain. I will just pretend this first row doesn't exist, however, like the book does, and start counting our rows from here. On the first row, we knit the 5 edge stitches, purl 1 stitch, then repeat knitting 9 stitches and purling 1 stitch twice. We knit the last 5 edge stitches. We knit the second row plain. The third row is the same as the first one. We knit the 5 edge stitches, then knit 9 stitches and purl 1 stitch twice, and knit the last 5 stitches. We knit the fourth row. The fifth row is again the same as the first and the third one. The sixth row requires some attention. We knit the 5 edge stitches, then we make 1 stitch. Now I only figured out the right way to do this increase later, because the book doesn't give exact instructions on how to execute it. So what you can see here is not the optimal way to do this increase. For the correct method, please refer to the timestamps. Then we knit 1 and make 1 stitch again. What you see this time is the right way to do this increase, however, so here's how to do it. We insert the right needle into the horizontal bar between the last stitch knitted and the next one. Then we put it on our left needle from back to front. After this new stitch is safely on the left hand needle, we knit it through the back loop. It's really hard to explain, but hopefully the visuals help. This kind of increase must surely have a name in modern knitting, but I don't know what it is. You can see here, because I did the first increase wrong, that the kind of little diagonal lines the two increases created both go upwards from right to left, and that's not exactly what we want here. The first one should go downwards from right to left, so that they're mirror images of each other on both sides of the center stitch of the leaf. I hope this makes at least some sense to you. So after the second increase, we knit 9 stitches, then repeat from the first increase as many times as needed. Knit the edge stitches after the last increase, 5 in my case. The 7th row begins with 5 edge stitches. We always knit these. And then we purl 3, knit 9 and repeat from purling 3 until we get to our 5 edge stitches at the end of the row. The 8th row is a bit of a tricky one again. We knit 1 less stitch for the edge, which is 4 edge stitches instead of 5 in my case. Then we knit 2 stitches together, which makes for a right leaning decrease. Make 1 stitch, but what you see here is the wrong way again, so don't do it like this. Knit 1 stitch, this stitch will be the center of the leaf, then make 1 stitch the same way as the second increase in the 6th row. Then we again decrease 1 stitch by slipping 1 stitch as if to knit, knitting the next one and passing the slip stitch over the stitch we've just knit. This makes for a left leaning decrease. Then we knit 7 stitches, this is for the plain space between the leaves, and repeat from the first decrease. At the end of the row we are left with 1 less edge stitch, which means 4 in my case. I knit these. We begin the 9th row by knitting the 4 edge stitches, then we purl 5 stitches, knit 7, and repeat from the purl 5. We knit the 4 edge stitches at the end of the row. We again knit 1 less edge stitch at the beginning of the 10th row, so I knit 3. Then we start with a right leaning decrease again, as in we knit 2 together, then we knit 1, The next stitch is the center stitch of the leaf, but first we make one stitch. So you might have noticed that we always do these increases on both sides of the center stitch of the leaf, as in we do one increase before and one increase after the center stitch. The increase before the center stitch is what I have been doing wrong, and this is where I realize it. When making one stitch before the center stitch, we have to insert the right needle from the front below the horizontal bar between the stitch we've last knitted and the next one, and this is the move that makes all the difference. Instead of putting it on the left needle from the back to front, we put it on the left needle from the front to back. Then we knit it as a normal knit stitch. You see, this little diagonal line the increase created now goes downwards from the right to left instead of going upwards. Now we knit the center stitch of the leaf, then make one, by putting the horizontal bar on the left needle from the back to front, then knitting it. Knit one, then do a left leaning decrease by slipping one stitch as if to knit, knitting the next one, and passing the slip stitch over the stitch we've just knit. Then we knit 5 stitches for the space in between the leaves and repeat from the first decrease again. At the end of the row we knit the 3 edge stitches. On the next row we knit the 3 edge stitches, then we purl 7 stitches, knit 5 and repeat from purling 7 until we get to the edge stitches, 3 of these in my case. The 12th row begins with one less edge stitch again, so we knit 2, then we do the right leaning decrease by knitting 2 together, then we knit 2 stitches. We now make one stitch by lifting that horizontal bar onto the left needle from the front to back, now that we know that's the right way to do it before the center stitch, and knit it. Knit the center stitch of the leaf. Make one stitch by lifting the horizontal bar onto the left needle from back to front this time and knitting it through the back loop. Then we knit to the center of the next leaf, which means knitting 11 stitches plain. Now we repeat from making one stitch until we get to the last 6 stitches. We knit 2, make a left leaning decrease, and knit the 2 edge stitches at the end of the row. We begin the 13th row by knitting 2 stitches, then we purl 9, knit 5, and repeat from the purl 9 until we get to the 2 edge stitches. We knit these. We don't have any more increases in the 14th row. This row is the turning point for the leaf. This is where it starts narrowing instead of getting wider. We knit the 2 edge stitches. We do our left leaning decrease first this time, because as I mentioned, the leaf is no longer getting wider, so this line starts to go to the left instead of to the right. So we do the left leaning decrease by slipping one stitch as if to knit, knitting the next stitch and passing the slip stitch over the stitch we've just knit. Knit 5, do a right leaning decrease by knitting 2 stitches together. We knit 5 stitches and repeat from the first decrease until we get to the 2 edge stitches. We knit these. We knit the 2 edge stitches in the 15th row, purl 7 stitches, knit 5 and repeat from purling 7 until we get to the 2 edge stitches. We knit those. The 16th row is easy, we take a rest by just knitting a cross plain. The 17th row is the same as the 15th, so we knit the 2 edge stitches, purl 7 stitches, knit 5 and repeat from purling 7 until we get to the 2 edge stitches. We knit those. The 18th row needs a bit of extra attention again. We knit the 2 edge stitches, then make one stitch. Now I'm not really sure if I've got the method for making this stitch right, because the description is really vague, but it looks okay, so here's how I did it. We put the left hand needle through the left side of the stitch we've just knitted, from below, and then we knit it like a normal knit stitch. Do a left leaning decrease by slipping one stitch as if to knit, knitting the next one, passing the slip stitch over it. Then we knit the next 3 stitches. Do a right leaning decrease by knitting the next 2 stitches together. Then we knit 1, make 1, knit 3 stitches, make 1, knit 1, and repeat from the first decrease. At the end of the row, when we have 2 stitches left, we knit 1, make 1, and knit the last one. The 19th row begins with 1 more edge stitch than the last one, so that's 3 for me. We knit these, then we purl 5, knit 7, and repeat from the purl 5 until we get to the 3 edge stitches and knit those. The 20th row is basically the last of the more difficult ones. We start with the same number of edge stitches as in the last row, that's 3 for me. Make 1 with the same method as before, so lift the left side of the stitch just knitted onto the left needle and knit it. Do a left leaning decrease, as in slip 1 stitch, knit the next, pass the slip stitch over, knit 1, do a right leaning decrease by knitting 2 stitches together, knit 1, then we make 1 as in the previous row. Knit 1, then we knit 5 stitches for the space between the leaves, make 1, knit 1, and repeat from the first decrease. Then we get to the last 2 stitches of the row, we knit 1, make 1, and knit 1. The 21st row begins with 1 more edge stitches than we had in the last row, that's 4 for me, we knit these. Then we purl 3 stitches, knit 9, and repeat from purling 3 until we get to the 4 edge stitches at the end of the row, and we knit those. We knit the 4 edge stitches at the beginning of the 22nd row, then we do a left leaning decrease by slipping 1 stitch, knitting the next, and passing the slip stitch over the one we've just knitted, then we knit 10 and repeat from the decrease until we get to the 4 edge stitches at the end of the row and knit those. And that's one repeat of the leaf pattern complete. The last, 23rd row, is basically the first row of the next repeat of the leaf pattern. If you want alternating rows of leaves, however, then this, 23rd row, will not be exactly the same as the first row of the first repeat, like the book states. Depending on the number of edge stitches you have, you'll have to do some math to calculate the placement of your leaves in this row. For my square, I needed 3 repeats, and the center row of leaves needed to be a bit different. I chose not to make half leaves at each side of the square, as you can see in the illustration in the book. I simply knit more edge stitches on both sides in this second, center row of leaves. As I already mentioned in my previous stitch pattern video demonstrating the waffle stitch, I will knit 40 squares for the throw, with 4 squares of each stitch pattern, so to achieve that, we now have 8 more Victorian stitch patterns to go. I also explained how I washed and blocked the finished square in that video, if you happen to need some help with that. Next time, however, I finally bring you the completed chemise with the crochet yoke, so stay tuned for that if you're at all interested. Until then, goodbye!